Hey, Mark here, and welcome to Talking Joe. You join us for the second part of our discussion with G.I. Joe original comic art collector Chuck Costas. In part one, we'd just finished talking about Russ Heath's page from G.I. Joe 24, and as we open part two, we begin by talking about Frank Springer's page from G.I. Joe 27, page 13, the Origin of Snake Eyes issue. So, as before, you can find the original art that we're discussing over on YouTube, or you can also find a PDF of all of this art on the Patreon page, patreon.com/talkingjoe. Let's head on back into the conversation with Chuck. So we were just talking about him. Here's the man, Frank Springer, on, again, a classic issue, 27.
Yeah, so as we on the eve of the release of the new Snake Eyes movie that will be coming out in the next few weeks, I thought I had to have an example from the Origin of Snake Eyes issues, which was 27, and a little bit of more of a backstory on this. So I'll talk about the art. So Frank Springer obviously took over. This was his first issue because 26 was done by Hama, 25 is his first issue, which was the first full Zartan. Then they took a break, went to Hama and Steve Leialoha inking that, and then came back, and then this is sort of the beginning of his more regular part run on this. But I guess 28 though or 29 was Marie Severin, so still some fill-ins now that I think about it. But this was just a great sequence of, obviously the origin story goes without saying. It's going to last. It's probably the most memorable storyline, 21, 26, 27 of Snake Eyes' origins, and it'll probably be told many different times, and look forward to the way that they're going to tell it in the new Snake Eyes movie. But just a great battle sequence between Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow erupting here as part of this. And so I was lucky enough, I guess the story behind this is, there was a collector, and you may have talked about him many times, Howie Welsh. And this was a page that I actually was my first sort of trade with Howie. Howie was trying to assemble pages from each of the different G.I. Joe issues. And he also lived in Virginia, which wasn't too far away from us. So we actually got together for a day, looked through original art, showed him a lot of the pages that I had, and looked through his collection. And he was next to myself. I think he was one of the other people that was very adamant about finding the original G.I. Joe pages and trying to build a collection of that. And so, Howie, I really respected what he was trying to do as far as also sort of continuing on and telling the legacy of those G.I. Joe comics. But Frank Springer had sold a number of his pages. I was lucky enough to run into Frank at, frankly, the only convention I think I've ever seen him at. And I bought some G.I. Joe pages from him, but I believe these went to either Europe, or I had missed out on some of these pages from 27. And Howie had ended up with a number of pages from issue 27, including this whole fight sequence between Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow. And so as part of the trade, I ended up getting, the pages that all sort of went to this fight sequence. And I forget what I had traded Howie, maybe a page from issue 3 and some other early pages, so that he could sort of fill out his collection. But really appreciate, Howie working with that. It was a great day. And I just want to remember him as a great collector who unfortunately passed away a number of years ago. But this is a great page that he was, helped me to add to my collection, and I really appreciate it.
It has taken me a long time to realize how much I like Frank Springer's art compared to all of the other artists who contributed to the first 50, 100 issues of G.I. Joe. His issues were the ones that I connected to the least when I was initially building my complete collection of issues before they were all available in paperback. And his cover with the Dreadnoks, when I first saw it and I got it, I just thought it was just really unappealing. But as I've gotten older, and I sort of understand just how hard it is to draw comics and how hard it is for editorial to put together a monthly book and not miss too many deadlines, right? Particularly when it's tied in with a toy line. I just sort of appreciate any of the work, even the issues that I don't like. But part of what made me part of what turned for me with Springer's work is to not compare it to issue 26. Being chapter 2 of a 2-part story where everyone really likes chapter 1, like you can't win. And this art on this page so much more agrees with Trimpe and Vosberg and even Marie Severin an issue or two later. And like Hama is coming from a different place. And that connection with Lealoha is so particular, right? And like only those 2 issues look like those 2 issues. So there's also a looseness to Springer's work. And what also helped me sort of connect more with it was after he died, I was Googling him, and to see work that he had done for other publishers and for other publications separate from G.I. Joe, I could see his comics work in this continuum of his career. And it made me appreciate his skills much more, which I wasn't seeing when I was just comparing 27 to 26.
Tim, I feel the same way as you. I think I had that same reaction, which was 27 just didn't seem as good as 26. But in the scheme of things, it was also classic G.I. Joe artwork, and in the vein of what, say, Vosberg was doing, with a slightly different style to it as well. So agree with that. And I think, Trimpe, Vosberg, others, they've done some great work outside of G.I. Joe. And you really, when you see that work, you do appreciate them as artists. I mean, I think Springer's work on Nick Fury after he took over for Steranko, I mean, how hard is that to follow Jim Steranko as an artist drawing, a character that Jim Steranko made popular? Very tough. But he did a fine job doing that. And I think here he had to step into some shoes and follow some other great artists that had done stuff. And, the action sequence is really, really great here. And, the renditions of especially Storm Shadow there and Snake Eyes, just, what we would think of as classic Joe of the time period.
And Snake Eyes being he's left really open in terms of the colors. He is in the black and white inks. He is white, apart from a few spotted blacks here and there. It's being left for the colorist to fill that in. I think, Tim, you were straining to look over here that there is some white out on the Softmaster's eyes, where they've obviously had to, gone back and fine tune it to try and, I guess, try and make sure that the characteristic of the the eyes is caught correctly.
I was also noticing the guide ovals for where to place the word balloons. There's a blue oval. Yeah. There's a blue oval on every panel where I don't know if it's the letterer on a first pass or Springer himself showing visually the letterer, like, this is where I want you to put the word balloon because I haven't put anything important here. And then I think they're numbered. And again, there's this non-photo blue. And if the non-photo blue seems crazy to you, like, just look above the top panel, right? Book, issue number, page number. That those pre-printed lines on this Marvel Bristol board are in non-photo blue.
Excellent. Are we ready to move on to the next thing?
Yeah.
Okay. I think this section we can repurpose our gallery jingle. So I'll do just that.
Let's have a look at the covers in the gallery.
That came through. It said, "Let's take a look at the covers in the gallery." And here's definitely a cover.
That is a cover. And I think it's interesting to note, we didn't note that, Michael Golden had done the cover to issue 27, which, knowing how I've picked covers, most likely that was also a commercial that was going on at the time. And I think this was actually a commercial, if I remember correctly, as well. So I keep picking ones that turn into TV commercials. This is a Michael Golden cover as well. So where on 27, Golden was working out of black and white, or in black and white artwork similar to the interior artist. Here he took a different approach. So Golden did the covers to similar to this for issues 23, 29, 36, and then yearbook 1. but he took more of an animation style, which was Golden did this for a little bit. He did it on other books like Crystar and Cull. But this is a very large, and I actually do have it next to me to show you just how large it is compared to. So this is how large the painting is. This is the page to 24, so you can see.
Wow.
Much bigger, very huge, the largest animation cell that you can imagine. So, but yeah, it goes all the way down there.
Sure.
And so my understanding. Sorry, go ahead.
How many layers is that?
I believe I have it in plastic right now. I believe it's 2 or 3 layers.
Okay.
I think it's 3 layers if I remember correctly, because I think the blacks are drawn on one layer. Then you got sort of that blue, like where the plane is, and then I think you've got a background layer on it. So I think it's a 3 layer, if I remember correctly, to this piece. And then they all line up. They've got little guides that will show you where they actually should be placed on top of it, because each of them is on acetate, similar to an animation cell. But what's interesting is where a lot of artists would do the black and white, and they would actually do it on a board and then photocopy it onto the acetate itself. Golden, I believe, actually inked these directly onto the acetate in the black, and then the rest of the stuff was also painted. So there's all hand-drawn artwork to these paintings, which it just makes them pop. I mean, I think he really felt like, this is an animated TV show at this point in time. Let's take the animation and turn it into the comics. And this is Golden's attempt at bringing animation to a comic book cover. And these covers were all super memorable. I mean, I think 23 was, honestly my favorite out of all of them, but all these covers that were drawn this way are pretty fantastic.
So it's worth pointing out with this parallel, Chuck, that you're drawing to animation. When we think of animation cells, right? And just so everyone knows, that's spelled with 1 L, C-E-L. It's not spelled with 2 L's. Animation cells, until the 70s, right? Animation artwork's drawn in pencil on paper, and then a second artist redraws it in ink onto a clear celluloid. And then
actually, sometimes they'll draw it on paper and then they'll photocopy the black and white artist, then translated to the acetate.
Right. Hand drawn until Disney started using xerography in the 70s. And then the painted background is paint on top of a board or like a thick piece of paper, and then animation paint is painted onto the backside of the animation cell. And if you painted it on the top, then you create all these little shadows. If you can imagine when you spread peanut butter on bread, if you put it near a lamp, you're going to see all these shadows where the nooks and crannies are. But if you put, in this analogy, peanut butter on a window, and then you go outside and you look at the front of the window, you're just going to see this like smooth, solid sort of beige color. Golden had painted covers for Conan, and the reproduction was not great. Painted in a normal way, just paint on board, like a Joe Jusko cover or an Earl Norem cover. And this more animation approach was going to work better. And what you see in the like weapons fire, where you have these soft edges, is airbrush. So Golden, publishers pay more for painted covers because they understand that painted covers take longer, and maybe it's a prestige project, or maybe it's going to sell better because it's sort of an eye-catching cover. So this is a lot of, in addition to being big and really well drawn, like we all know this is really well drawn. Like you can't say it enough, right? Because like there are very few artists besides Golden who could take a shape as strange as the cobra asp and show it as little of it as you see in this cover and from this angle, and yet still make it, one, recognizable, and two, like exciting and compelling and dangerous, right? Like I've tried to draw the cobra asp. It's not easy. And you want to draw it sort of like where you can see the whole thing. So, well, it's got these two clamps, and it's got like a tire, and there's a cockpit. It's got these two guns. Something else that Golden is doing here is he's bringing in atmospheric perspective. So any outlines that would normally be black, those are only for the shapes that are closest to us. And then all the outlines for the whale and the two rattlers in the sky, those are blue or blue-gray, and it knocks them back. So it's even more clear what is close to us and what is far from us. And then the background, the bottom layer, is just this really simple pink maroon with just a little bit of a gradient. It gets a little brighter at the bottom. Chuck, I suspect this might be 4 layers.
It's possible. I hate to take it out on camera right now to try to mess with it, but it's possible. I think there's like a base, like the base drawing is actually on board, and then there's multiple layers that have the planes and then the asp in the front. So, but the black, I agree with you, and I think he used the same approach as far as sort of defining the depth of each. When you look at 29, I think you've got Destro in the front of that cover and in very heavy black, and then sort of fades to sort of a lighter shades in the background to sort of give it a more 3D effect, which I think was also just very innovative. And I think, keeping in mind that, although Zek was known for doing, say, the Punisher covers in airbrush later on in 1986, which they really did in 1985, this actually predates doing those covers. So Golden was a bit of ahead. Sienkiewicz, I guess, was also doing painted covers for Marvel for New Mutants in the early days as well. Again, I'd heard the story, you get paid more, so why not do a painted cover if you have the opportunity to do that. And I guess G.I. Joe was selling well enough at the time that Marvel probably felt it was worthwhile to invest in doing some great covers. So
as a kid, I was always sort of confused by the inconsistency of, some issues drawn by the regular artist and then a fill-in, some covers that are, the guy who's been doing all the covers, and then all of a sudden there'd be a cover like this, which is much fancier. But, this one was a TV ad, but it didn't always seem to line up with, an anniversary or a key story change. And I think that's the sort of day in, day out of editors lining up artists. It's like, okay, can you get me this cover? It's like, well, he's going to take 4 weeks to do that cover. I got to line up the next cover with someone else.
Well, and I think it goes back to this again was one that they were going to use on television. So it really needed to pop, and they needed to do that. But, back to your comment around Springer, now that I think about it, since that was also a Michael Golden cover, it was probably also like, wow, the cover is really fantastic. And then it's like, then you go to the inside. It was kind of like, sort of Vosberg on Punisher #5 when he took over for Zek. It was like, wow, what a great Punisher cover on the front. And it's just like, this doesn't match to what you're sort of seeing as far as the art style. And I do think that juxtaposition of two different artists can sort of create that feeling of disappointment, as you were saying, even if the art is pretty strong by itself. So
I'm going to guess that Golden requested the colors for the logo, an unusual yellow outline with that blue aqua fill for the 5 letters, because Golden would color his covers when he drew them, and of course he's coloring them when he's painting them. And then later, briefly in the 90s, he was a cover editor at Marvel briefly. But this is an unusual cover for many reasons. Sort of the least of which is the unusual color treatment on the logo.
It is. And again, I think if you map Golden's covers, most of them were probably used in TV ads. And that's probably the reason that they are sort of sporadic through the run. And then it also makes sense, too, if they're talking about sort of, and kids have been watching the G.I. Joe animated series, the fact that you have animated covers that sort of go along with it is probably more consistent. And the thought would be, gets them more excited about potentially reading the comics if there's more consistency to the TV shows.
I think it's probably worth pointing out as well the cropping of the cover as published removes a fair chunk of the actual published art. Like so we're missing, I guess, a big chunk of the second Rattler. You might not even notice that it's there. We're missing most of the detail down there of that right hand cannon on the whale. Some of the left, although there's less going on, and some of the the bottom of the image, so we don't actually see his signature on the published cover as well. So it's lovely to see all of that extra detail that get lost, and even this lettering from the toy on the whale that he's painstakingly added in, as well as just recreating the G.I. Joe logo and that whale there as well. That's it's incredible detail. And I bet if you stick your face right up against it and squint at the detail on those individual characters of Snowjob and Torpedo there, it looks like there's just so much detail. Incredible.
Yeah, I mean, really all classic. Golden was already known as sort of one of the artists. He was an artist that everybody else emulated at the time, and was really pushing what could be done here. And when you see all four, I haven't seen the 23 in person. I did get a chance to see the 29 years ago, and I think Howie actually used to own the back cover to G.I. Joe Yearbook 1, which was also painted by Golden's, as well as the front cover. But they're very impressive, but they're obviously very hard to find any of these covers out there and still in the wild. And I can't even remember when I picked this up, at least 10 years ago at this point in time.
And is there a story about how you found this one?
I can't even remember. It may have even been an eBay purchase or an auction purchase. I almost feel like I bought it the second time around. I almost feel like it had traded hands once, and then I saw it come up again, and I felt like the second time around I couldn't pass it up. Now I think about it, I think there was an art dealer named Albert Moy who was working with Golden and selling some of these. So I think the 29, I had looked at it, and I think it's just, these covers weren't that cheap compared to other things. So they were an investment to get one, and I always hoped for the 23, and I think the 29 was around, and I like the 29 as well, and I think it sold, and I regretted the fact that I never made a move to buy it. And so I think when the 36 came up, I was just like, I've got to own one of these animated covers, and I'm just not sure when I'm going to get a chance to buy another one. So I think I jumped at the chance when this came up. So
sure.
I just want to say one last thing about the composition. We see just enough of the rocks and the ocean to sell the idea that this is a sea vehicle that's on the water, coming at us, aiming at a land vehicle. This is one of those. This is one of those things where I think because Golden is so good at composition, I wouldn't quite say he makes it look easy, but there's so much negative space in the sky because he's going to have a logo in a corner box, right? But he is so deftly placing things. Right, we see just enough of the whale to really know that it's the whale. We see just enough of the asp to really know that it's the asp. But we get this sort of, it's got to be really small, but we get all of that lower rattler. And in terms of camera placement, to use a movie term, and you don't want the whale to be smaller because then it's not going to have any impact. But if you were drawing comics and someone gave you this sentence, right, like whale with Snowjob and Torpedo in the water, coming up on the rocky beach where an asp with a Cobra officer in the cockpit is firing on them while two rattlers swoop down from the sky, right? Like you would have to do several sketches before you even came close to like getting it all in and also making it work.
Yeah. And then 99 out of 100 people would never get it as close to as being as good as this. Okay, are we ready to move on? And Chuck, are you okay to keep on plowing on as well?
Like I said, I'm all by myself tonight or today, so
okay,
we're good.
And we're always happy to keep on talking, Joe, particularly when we're looking at material as amazing as this.
I have to ask one more question, Chuck. Have you held the cover next to the painting and just gone back and forth to see how the color reproduced, or how it's different in the original?
I don't think I've done a detailed color analysis on that. I guess when I see the original, the blacks really pop just because they're hand drawn inks on the acetate and they're on the layer to the top. I mean, you can see right there that it's a little bit more, it's got more gradations of pink, on the final printed cover. It couldn't read probably the, that was the problem even at the time, is that they couldn't necessarily read as well, even on some of these painted covers. So I always feel like, as much, the printing had improved to some degree, but it still wasn't good enough to really truly reproduce these covers, these painted covers, whether it's this one or the Punisher 1 cover, really well. And so I think you lose some of the details. So I think I always remembered, frankly, that the printed one was a little bit more disappointing than when I saw the actual original itself. So that was part of the reason I was like, I got to own the original. So much better. What?
I've got mine here. Just
oh, there you go.
Having sticking my face up against it and seeing what's there, what's not.
Yeah, that's the problem. Sometimes you actually get disappointed in the final printed covers when you see them. And we'll see that with like 47 later on. But it's like some of the things they change is like, you made it worse.
I think for me it goes the opposite way, where a cover I don't like, I will like after I see the original art, because I'll sort of understand better what the artist was doing. Like Mike Zeck's cover to 44, like it's a good drawing. The cover really never did it for me. And then I held the original and I thought, oh, there's so much artistry here. And without the color, which was totally fine, sort of it just sort of, the original pulses, it breathes in front of me.
It's true. Sometimes the coloring can actually not do a service to the actual black and white art as well. But Mark, maybe we should move on to the next.
Next up, yeah.
I even forget. Oh, speaking of 47. Jeez, I always forget what order we're going in here and what we're talking about. So 47. So this is, I guess, the story that sort of continuing the early part of this conversation, which seems a long time ago. As far as when I met Mike Zeck in 1986, in January, right when the Punisher miniseries was coming out, and I had heard he was going to be at the show. I was set up with a deal. I was set up actually helping a dealer, a friend of mine, as a helper at this 3-day creation comic convention. And next to us was Mike Zeck and John Beatty. So I heard they were going to be at the show. G.I. Joe, at that point, I was all in. I was my favorite comic. And I think G.I. Joe 44 was just on the stands. So when Mike showed up, I was like, I hope he's got a G.I. Joe cover. I hope I can buy a G.I. Joe cover. I really hope he's got something. He showed up with the covers to 45, 46, and 47. And so I hadn't seen any of these covers. These had not hit the stands yet. And so I was like, he's like, can I buy one? And he's like, yep, you got first crack at which one do you want between 45, 46, and 47. And again, I was a teenager and didn't have any money. The price on all of them, I think, was $45 for each of them. So, but, I looked at how much money I had in my pocket and I was like, I could probably just get one of them. And so I had my choice. And, I wouldn't say stupidly, but in retrospect, I think most people probably would have chosen the 46 with Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow. And as soon as I sort of landed on choosing this one, somebody else jumped in and bought that immediately. And I've never seen it since. But for me, it was the detail on the cover. And this is actually all Mike a lot of times worked with John Beatty at the time, but this is all actual Mike Zeck pencil and inking on it.
Oh, wow.
I just thought the detail on this cover was just so fantastic that was the one I chose. And then the 45, the dealer that I was actually set up with, who didn't buy original artwork, was just, so happy with what he saw as well, that he had to buy the 45 cover. And we sort of always had this deal. I was like, you bought that today for 45, but I'm going to buy that back. And I might even pay you $100 for it, in a few years. Give me the first chance at buying it back. Unfortunately, that dealer friend of mine passed away many, many, many years ago. And his widow has no idea what happened to the 45 cover. So it's out there. But unfortunately, we don't know where it is anymore. So of that day, the only one I took home with me was the 47, which is a great cover. But what's interesting about it, and I'll show you on the original, and I apologize, it's like I looked at this today and it's like this is where seeing what happens with rubber cement that was on the back of that has bled through on the acetate and left a stain. I'm going to have to go get my art restorer to fix that. But you'll see the original artwork that was underneath this. And when you when you compare it to what was published, because originally they had this logo on it, which is a lot, it goes down a lot further, and they decided because of the Marvel 25th anniversary, they were going to cut the G.I. Joe logo and move up the corner box art. You can see they ended up redrawing the artwork when you see the published cover there. I don't know if you've got the side-by-side view of it anymore, but if you can show it against the published cover looks worse, because they ended up having to redraw it, and they didn't redraw it the same way Mike would have drawn it. So you lose a lot of the detail that Mike had in that original artwork because of the the edits that were happening after he had turned in the artwork there. But it was kind of the discussion I had with Mike after buying this. I guess the longer story was I spent the whole weekend with him. After that night, I went home and I think I also wanted some Punisher artwork, so I ended up buying 2 pages from issue 2 of Punisher. I think it was page 1, and then where the guy gets his neck cut off in the Metro. But I went home that night and I was like, Mom, I met this artist. I need to borrow some money. I need to borrow I need like $300 or something. And Mike had offered to sell me all of Punisher 2 for $300, for an additional $300. Like, Mom, I gotta buy this. I just love it. And I love his art. I gotta buy it. So I borrowed that. I had to pay my mom back all summer for the money I had borrowed by mowing lawns the rest of the summer. But I was able to walk home with this and then all of Punisher 2 after that convention. But the great thing was, from a G.I. Joe perspective, I was like, Mike, does anybody, what do you do with the artwork if you're not going to a comic show? He's like, well, honestly, just sort of sits there. Nobody really cares about my G.I. Joe artwork. So if you want to buy it, just call me up every month and just let me know you want it, and I'll put it aside for you and mail it down to you. So that started my relationship with Mike of buying his G.I. Joe covers as he was doing them. But didn't get all of them. Unfortunately, Mike got into, I think, the ones right after this, the 48, the 49, and 50. He ended up going to a poker match in Florida, I heard, and losing the bet. And so he had to pay off his debt with the covers to 47, 48, and 49. And ironically, I worked, and Tim, you may know that. Do you ever go to Another World in Georgetown?
Oh, yes.
Yes. So I used to work at Another World in Georgetown, and my boss, Steve Milo, had somehow bought the covers from Mike, and we ended up giving them away as we did a promotion with, I think it was B97, if I remember. We had a radio station there, and we had all these artists. It was Valiant was really big, and I can't remember why we gave away G.I. Joe covers, but the grand prize, we had a raffle that day, and we gave away the covers to all 3 of those issues of 40, 48, 49, and 50. So I didn't get those issues, right away, and then it wasn't until later that I got issue 52. Because Byrne did 51, if you remember that, correct? So, but this was it. This was great, and like I said, it was my starting to really collect the G.I. Joe covers as much as I could.
And how old would you have been at this point?
What year was this? What is there a publication year on this?
This is 86 because it's
I guess it would have been January of 86. So I would have been 15, just turned 15 at the time.
And hats off to your parents for loaning you the money to buy these, because we were just talking off air before we started that just last week there was a brand new record set for a Zek Interior Punisher page, which if I'm remembering correctly was $33,000 for a page. So I think your mum's return on investment is probably not too bad.
Yeah, so that if that's a sign, that was a page from issue 4 of the limited series sold for that much, which I guess I used to own that page at one point and had sold that to a collector as well. But yeah, I guess Punisher art is that, and then there's actually Kraven's Last Hunt art that sold in a similar range a few weeks before that. So Zek art seems to be hot these days. I guess I bet on one of the hot artists back when I was a teenager, but for me, it's really, it's funny. Years later, Mike was like, we were talking in the early maybe 2000s, and Mike was like, "Do you still have all that G.I. Joe art you bought for me?" He's like, "By now you must have sold it, because the covers were, I think they'd gone up to like $400, $500. Like, you'd be stupid not to have sold them." Like, nope, Mike, I still have every single cover I ever bought from you. And he's like,
foolishly holding on to those. Yeah.
He's like, okay, and now he's always like, "You're a pretty smart guy." I wish I had kept some of my own artwork, but in some ways, but I was always that kid that, again, I never did it out of a place of I'm going to make a ton of money off of this stuff. I just bought it because I really liked it, and frankly thought it was money that might be wasted, so to speak, because there was no price guide for original art. Didn't seem to be anybody else collecting it, because you were sort of in your own silo at these conventions when you were buying it from these artists. You were ever wondering, because everybody else would look at you, as we talked about earlier, it's like you look at you sideways and like, what is this? Why are you buying it? It was a foreign concept in the 80s to buy original art from artists and think that it might actually go up in value at some point in time.
Well, and one more question. So you were having these conversations with Mike on the phone, and he was describing upcoming covers and whether you'd want to buy them or not.
Yes.
Were there any that he described to you and you thought, you know what, maybe that one's not for me, I'm going to pass?
Not of G.I. Joe covers, and I don't think it was usually his descriptions. I remember, I would talk to him when he was just started on Batman. He was doing the 10 Nights of the Beast, and he was like, this Batman 417 cover, for folks that look at it, and now it's a classic cover. And he was just lamenting to me. He's like, I think I'm spending too much time drawing the backgrounds that I'm not. It's like I'm not making any money because I'm spending way too much time on this cover. But now it's like an all-time classic cover, and the original. I don't own the original art to that one. I have a different Batman cover, but that would probably at least easily be over $100,000 for that cover today. No, I don't think there was any G.I. Joe covers that I passed up because of the description of it. I later passed on it because again, when I was paying for covers, they were $40 to $50 depending on how much Mike liked the cover. But he. At that same show, he got introduced to Jim Warden, who was a dealer, a friend of mine as well. He came over and met Mike as well, and then ultimately became Mike's agent. And then I think it was around issue 50. It was in the later 50s that he took over as Zek's art agent, and then the prices went up to $75 a cover. And I was like, I'm out. I was like, I'm in for paying $40 to $50 a cover, but when I have to pay $75, I can't afford this anymore. So I really stopped buying Mike's covers sort of towards the end of the run. I bought a lot of the special missions covers as they were coming out, just to sort of keep the run going on that. But like 59, 60, I remember, were $75, and I was like, I don't think I can pay that for these. It's just too much for me.
As a young guy, 15, 16, you're not going to have huge amounts of spare cash sloshing about. Mowing lawns only pays so much, I guess.
I got about $10 a lawn, so that was, and I do like two to three lawns a month.
5 lawns equals one Zek cover. Right.
So part of the comparison here, that 40 or 50 was a lot then to buy a cover, and was a lot for a young person to spend. An artist drawing a cover for Marvel in the mid 80s would have been paid $200, $300.
I don't know the page rate, but that would probably be like a cover penciling, yeah. Because even inking like interior pages was probably like more like $75 to 150, depending on who you were. But
yeah, so in 99, I knew a guy who was penciling at Dark Horse, and he was saying like, oh, the Marvel starting rate is like $100 per pencil for pencils, and it hasn't really changed in a long time. So part of the like you're spending so much money, and like from nowadays, like, oh my gosh, Chuck, you're not spending a lot of money. Zek has already made, for what was the time, good money for these covers, and he's making maybe half of it back for just like clearing it out of his home, where these stacks of pages and covers are just taking up space.
That's correct. I mean, they honestly looked at it as, they go to a convention, it was kind of drinking money, right? If they could sell any artwork at the show. They were actually doing sketches at the time, and at that point, when I met Hama, he wasn't charging for sketches, but Zek would regularly charge maybe $25 to do like a figure sketch. Maybe it was 50 or 40. So, to commission an artist even to do a sketch at that point in time was almost as much as buying a published cover. But a lot of people like this idea that you could ask the artist to draw whatever whatever you wanted, and so people were willing to pay almost as much as what they could pay for a cover, because of that privilege. And I always looked at it as, frankly, what made an impact to me was the published book itself. So I'd rather have the example of the published book. And so going back to our very first sort of discussion here, I've always sort of opted for the published stuff because when I read it, it makes an impact on me, where it's always nice to share that experience with an artist. But again, I've had the privilege of sort of hanging out with these guys a lot. So I don't feel like that's the only connection I have to these artists, where many people walk away, never see the person again, and that's all they have to remember their experience of meeting that artist.
And I guess the aspect of that, parity of payment of a commission versus buying a cover as well, is that particularly back then, where the original art didn't seem, wasn't really particularly valued very, very much. It's like, I'm going to have to, if I'm doing a commission, it's taking me time. That's my time. I want to be reimbursed for that time. Whereas the original art, and particularly, panel pages of a book, for example, rather than something a bit flashier, it's just a byproduct of the production process of creating a comic. It doesn't actually really have any value in itself. So if that's everywhere, everyone in the market is behaving with that mentality that it's almost throwaway, doesn't have a value, then you can kind of understand the things where it was back then.
The one observation I want to make about the cover to 47 is that this is how you draw machine guns firing, with that shape, with that yellow, with that red.
Well, Zek became the gun guy, so to speak. I mean, I think he always took pride in the fact that he actually researched the guns. He had, magazines at the time, because you couldn't go on the internet and find all this stuff, but he would have just gun magazines lying all over the place, and, became the guy that could draw machinery, whether it's this or the Punisher or anybody holding a gun. I think he ultimately did like Merc and stuff, but it was because his ability to draw people firing guns and or the guns themselves so well that he got those jobs. I mean, the G.I. Joe 43 cover, Tim, you got to admit that machine gun blast, pretty fantastic with Death holding that.
Yes.
Pretty fantastic.
Yes, it
okay,
is.
Next up, we have Herb Trimpe again, Special Missions #1, page 19.
Yeah, so I think let's start with the artwork on this, and then there is a backstory to this. But I mean, here's an example where Trimpe was drawing special missions, and I think compared to what we showed earlier with his initial designs for what was going on with G.I. Joe, a very different style, a very much more detailed style, not as heavy black. I mean, there is some black and white to it, but it's not as blocky as it was. And I think as a kid, I would say this was a little off-putting to me, in that it didn't match to the style I was used to seeing in the comics those days. And I guess it had evolved even from the early Trimpe days to, at that point, was it Ron Wagner that was drawing, I guess, around that same time? He was the regular artist. But, it had gone through this whole progression of all the artists we just talked through. And ultimately, you can see that Trimpe adapted his style. And I think that's the thing that also people don't realize about Herb, is that he was somebody that could adapt his style over time. Towards the end of his career, he was drawing like Rob Liefeld because that was the new Marvel style. That was what was popular at Marvel. And as much as that wasn't his natural style, he adapted to that. So given that Special Missions, I think, was intended to be a more real world book, you can see that he's using a more real world style to drawing the characters here. That is, not a little different to that. And I didn't like it at first, and it's kind of like Steve Ditko's art on Doctor Strange or other things, but you do learn to appreciate it over time. And I guess I'll pause and see Tim and Mark, reaction from you on Special Missions.
Yeah, so the Special Missions was previewed in issue 50, so I think issue 1 came out shortly after that. So it would have been Rod Wiggum who would have been penciling the main book at that stage as the contemporary for it. And yeah, issue #1 of Special Missions I experienced as the reprint in Action Force, which is how I experienced a lot of my first encounters with the Larry Hama G.I. Joe work. And yeah, I was really quite taken with it. It was I don't know if I can put my finger on it exactly, but yeah, it definitely left a big impression on me, particularly that first issue. Yeah, I really did enjoy it, and definitely did make a big impression on me at the time when I first encountered it.
My first issue of Special Missions was the final issue, which I bought new at a bookstore right before a road trip. And Special Missions is my desert island comic. If I could only bring one run with me, I would actually not bring Marvel G.I. Joe 1 through 155. I'd bring Special Missions. It's satisfying in a different way because as much as I love the ongoing sort of soap opera of G.I. Joe, you don't have to worry about it in Special Missions. And as much as I love Cobra, having the Joes contend with other bad guys is a real treat. And I'm a big fan of the 22-page self-contained story. Chuck, you make a point here about Trimpe taking on influences, and his work on Fantastic Four Unlimited at the end of his sort of regular comics drawing. He came back for a couple like special projects. He drew, some pages for Hulk and for Savage Dragon, but the end of his sort of regular career at Marvel looked really different. I am seeing a little bit. Is this Breckoff? Is this Colonel Breckoff in the final panel?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
I'm seeing a tiny bit of Michael Golden in there.
I am too. Yeah.
And I think what happened after Yearbook 2 was published is that anytime the October Guard showed up, Larry, Hama, or the editor on Joe would make sure that whoever was drawing the characters had some reference from Yearbook 2, because that was sort of now definitive. But there's a little bit of cartooning in that big chin, and there's a little bit more sort of rounded in the cheeks than I would expect from Trimpe. What strikes me about this page, and this is what I love about G.I. Joe Special Missions and also G.I. Joe and also 80s Marvel Comics, is that Mark, if you go back to the full image, if you could, there is so much writing going on, right? There's a lot of dialogue, but it's not onerous and it's not ponderous. It's not a slog to get through, right? Like there is a famous X-Men writer who wrote a lot of dialogue, and
John Byrne.
Those are great stories. I love the plots. The scripts are a little bit much for me, and I've never felt that way reading a G.I. Joe story. And Special Missions, because the first page we're often thrown right into the middle of it, and because Hama often has to sort of inform the reader, who's probably a 10-year-old kid in the 1980s, of what's going on, right? It's like, okay, there's a hijacking situation, and this is how this this old airplane works, and there's also like a satellite or a submarine or some terrorists, but it's not Cobra. And so you get in sort of the exposition, and I don't mean like a mission brief at the beginning, and 1 or 2 issues I think did that. But I look at this page and I see, and I mean this as a compliment, I see old school comics where there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There's 6 panels, although the configuration, it sort of works like 7 panels. There is no big glamour shot of anything, right? Like as a page, if you were looking on eBay or Comic Art Fans or an auction site, and if you saw this page, you'd buy this because you have to own something G.I. Joe or Special Missions or Trimpe. But you wouldn't buy this page because it's like the most exciting submarine or the most exciting vehicle that Trimpe drew. Like this is, it's page
19.
Okay. This is right. Thank you. On the bottom. So this is doing the work of telling the story. This is not that Vosberg splash page with Venom, Snake Eyes, and Quinn, which kind of acts as a second cover. And even like a G.I. Joe story now compared to 1986, 1987, when this was published, a G.I. Joe story now, even with the same writer, you're probably not going to have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 panels. Although sometimes you do, but sort of less often than I think you would have then. And, my dollar is valuable. So give me a lot happening on every page. And as exciting as it is to turn the page and there's some amazing 2-page splash of Spider-Man swinging through the city or, whatever it is. I'm much more interested in all of the things that happen here, right? It's like that's a Cobra sub surfacing off our starboard bow. Like, yes, tell me more.
So Chuck,
Yeah,
I think you've.
Oh, sorry.
I was going to say, you think you've got quite a few Trimpy pages. So in terms of when you were making your selection for today, what was it about this particular page that called out you
I
for
haven't gotten the
inclusion?
story behind the story on this one, but yeah, there is a story behind the story. So obviously, I had when GI Joe Special Missions 1 came out, Zach had told me about drawing the cover, and he was like, "Yeah, I got some guys kind of coming down off the ship. It's kind of cool." And I was like, "Okay." So do you want to buy it? I'm like, "Sure, I'll buy it." And I was like, I bought it sight unseen, so I had the cover. And then as I got to meet Herb, I'd asked him what he had kept, and he had not kept any of the original GI Joe run that he had done for A Real American Hero. That was all sold. He, frankly, after he got all the art back from Marvel, he sold that to a comic book dealer, for like $1 a page, and they just got everything of his, including his GI Joe, all his Hulk, everything. And so, but he had kept the special mission stuff because, frankly, he liked it so much. And I think, Tim, if that's your Desert Island, if you go back and look at that run, almost every splash page or everything that you sort of see there is a plane. Herb loved to draw. That aviation was his love. Like if he could go out and fly a plane, that was his dream. And I think it was issue 14 where it's like he draws. I think he's even in the story himself of Special Missions. It's just about, biplanes and all that kind of stuff. That is his passion. And I believe there must have been a conversation. It was like, look, if I'm going to come back and draw G.I. Joe, I'm going to draw what I want. And I want to draw a plane in every single story. And so when you look at every single Special Missions story, you will probably find a plane almost in every single one of those, because that's what Herb loved to draw. But he had special love for those Special Missions stories. And so he was like, I did keep it. I wanted to keep those because honestly, the fans don't appreciate my Special Missions artwork as much as they don't value it as much as they do those early issues. And so at the time, and this, when I started talking to him, was maybe 10 years ago at this point, I think he was saying, it's like, I want $175 a page for my artwork, but people are only willing to pay me like $100 a page or something like that. And it's just not worth it for me to sell it. I'd rather just keep it. So he had kept the Special Mission stories to himself for many, many years. But what happened was, I think it was because somebody in his family it goes back to Howie Welsh. Howie had wanted a page from G.I. Joe Special Missions 1. So they pulled a page out of Special Missions 1, which was this page, and had sold it to Howie at a convention many years ago. And when Herb found out about that, he was furious because he was like, I wanted to keep, like, that book needed to stay intact. It was his pride and joy. He's like, I can't believe that there's a page missing out of this complete book and that it was sold. And he was furious. It was always the one thing that he sort of regretted. And so then, years later, after Herb had passed, again, I was in contact with the family, but one of the family members had the rest of the pages from G.I. Joe Special Missions #1. And they actually put it on eBay. Is how I found out that they were selling it. So I actually contacted them through eBay and said, hey, can I just buy the complete book? And I think they had listed it at, a high enough price that nobody had put a bid on it yet. And so I think they just sold it to me directly. But I was able to get all the pages except for the one page that Howie had. So, I knew Howie had this page, and, afterwards was working with Howie to work out a trade so that I could reunite the book, because this is after Herb had passed. And I was like, honestly, Howie knew as well that was always Herb's one regret, that this page had gotten sold. And so we were working on a deal. And then, frankly, everything went dark for a while. And I wasn't sure what had happened. And Howie, for those that know, he passed away. He was in an unfortunate accident. And so in the middle of this deal, I didn't know that he had passed away. And so that's why I was not hearing back from Howie as to how we could complete the deal so I could get this page. All the pages ended up in Howie's collection ended up in another collector's collection. And I got a hold of that collector and explained the situation to him and said, look, I'd still like to reunite this page back with the story. And so he and I were able to work out a trade deal so that he got some things from me. And I was able to get this page. So, I felt years later that, sort of justice was served. Hopefully Herb up there is, happy that the pages all got reunited together as a complete book, so that hopefully it won't get split up again, even when I pass away. and it, for future generations will get to enjoy this book wherever it may go.
There was a time when Trimpy and his dealer were selling special missions pages. It was like a couple a week on eBay for months. And I got 2 of them, and they weren't favorites. They looked great. And I hadn't anything from special missions. And it is a great regret of mine that when IDW reprinted special missions in those 4 paperbacks, they did so seemingly by scanning the printed comics, stripping the color, and then recoloring them. And the reproduction looks bad. Whereas around that time, Trimpy was selling his art. And it's not that, you ask him to scan them or ask his agent to scan them or put out an APB amongst the collectors. It's like, can anyone contribute scans of pages? And I have a hard time looking at those 4 special missions reprints from IDW, as much as I love what IDW has done with and for G.I. Joe. Yeah. So seeing an original always makes me happy, because this is what it's supposed to look like. And that's, someday maybe they'll do a new edition of those books and, contact the fans who have pages and ask for scans.
Yeah,
I hope so. I've offered mine up to them. So if they need to do a special missions book, there's enough to do a complete artist edition. But I think fans out there need to demand it. So go to IDW and demand, yo Joe, go demand a special G.I. Joe IDW artist edition.
When I met Herb in 2013 in London, I asked him about what he had left, and I think it was literally maybe 1 or 2 pages of special missions that he had left at that point, or at least with him. I might be conflating things. Maybe he had more, but back home in the States. And yeah, I think he just had with him 1 page from Special Missions 4, which didn't feature any G.I. Joes or Cobras on the page itself. So I didn't pick it up. I probably should have, but
yeah, 4 was not, for whatever reason, 4 wasn't complete. I think he may not have done the inking on 4 or something along those lines, because the ones that typically got sold to him were the ones that he didn't do the inking on, so he didn't have complete books. I think the complete books Herb had tried to keep, at least the early ones, he had tried to keep to himself, because he had done, similar to Vosberg, he really appreciated the fact that he could do his own penciling and inking on those books. And Mark, it may be, frankly, when I had an event at my house in Maryland in 2010, and Tim, sorry that I didn't invite you. But Herb, what I usually had comic art get-togethers, and so I'd invite all the comic art collectors in the local area up, and I'd try to get an artist to show up. And Herb lived up in New York at the time, but since he was, frankly, a good friend, he drove all the way down from New York with Patricia, his wife. And they ended up doing another local show that weekend as well. But he just came down to sort of hang out, talk to everybody. But I had asked him if that was the first time. I was like, could I buy one of your special missions books? And he sold me all of issue 2, which the story to issue 2. Again, also own the Zek cover to that, which is sitting right back there. But the 2 was always, similar to 1. 1 was my favorite, but he wasn't willing to sell the 1 at that point, and maybe it was because it was was not complete. But it was all, or I think maybe he'd already given it to one of his kids. But the 2 reminded me of the original issue 2 in some ways. The storyline was very similar. There was sort of the sense that the villain got sort of the retribution that they deserved at the very end, and sort of that same sort of feeling. So that's why I always was drawn to Special Missions 2. Similar to the Real American Hero number 2 as well. But yeah, I think after that I had bought most of the complete books that he still, because I appreciated him, and I was willing to pay his price, I think, around what he was asking for them at the time. So I'm glad that that I could get them before. Frankly, they didn't get a lot on eBay. I think people didn't, because they were flooded to the market, they were going for maybe $50 a page or something like that. So they're very affordable to the people that bought them, but felt like it also, maybe they were worth a little bit more. And I think they are, especially now today. So I think Joe fans probably appreciate them more than they did back then.
I often have to remind myself that Special Missions was initially bi-monthly. It was published every other month. And it wasn't until around 15, 18 that it went monthly. And like I was reading comics. I got into comics right as it was ending, so I sort of had no say in it as a fan writing a letter or giving them my dollar. But sort of retroactively, I always wonder, oh, if only it had been monthly the whole time, and then by the time it ended the month that it did, there would have been 12 or 15 more issues I could have. Special missions would have ended at like 39 or 42, and who would have done another fill-in if Trimpe had done a couple issues by himself and then missed one, because there were a couple fill-ins along the way.
There were, yeah.
But alas, what would the Andy Kubert cover for the final issues have looked like if not a bunch of vehicles? Alas, that does not exist. I can't rewrite time.
Okay. So the next one is, funnily enough, it's something that we have talked about relatively recently, me and Tim, because we do a Devil's Due podcast discussion show where we've gone back and started reading the issues and discussing them, starting with issue 1, and now we're up to issue 5. No, 25, sorry. And yeah, this was something that we looked at and discussed, and the process around it and the way it looked, and what might have been. So with that vague preamble done, I'll move on to what it actually. Oh no! I've gone. I'm introducing the wrong thing. Can I skip ahead?
Well,
to the thing
I like you built
about?
up to it, so when we do get to it, we can stick with this. Oh, there we go.
There we go. This is the thing that I was actually talking about. I was getting too far ahead of myself. This one, David Michael Beck, back cover to G.I. Joe 8 from Devil's Due. So there's a story behind it.
Yeah, I mean the story behind this. When Devil's Due launched the quote unquote new G.I. Joe series in the early 2000s. That had been the first time, frankly, as an art collector, that I had sort of taken more interest in even looking at what new art was coming out. And, David Michael Beck's versions that he was doing on those back covers were just some classic portraits. That Snake Eyes and the Storm Shadow that he did, the Cobra Commander that he did on issue 4, all blew me away. There's some, those are the ones there's ones I like better than others, but those particular ones were pretty awesome. And then I guess, sort of my final, great favorite was this cover of the Baroness, or the back cover, to issue 8. So when I met David, so it's interesting on even on the Devil's Due artwork, when that was going up for sale, the first time I remember it for sale from these early issues, I think issues 1 and 2 and 3, I was at a con down in Florida. I think it was I don't know, not Florida SuperCon, but whatever the big con down in Florida was back in the early 2000s. And they had put some pages of the interior art by was it Steve Kurth, I think it was doing this stuff for them. Mm-hmm. Those were up for sale in a charity auction. So the first, I guess, Devil's Due art I got was that. But, frankly, after owning those for a little while, it wasn't as exciting to me as maybe the original G.I. Joe art, but then these David Michael Becks were. So I ran into Beck at a convention, I believe in Philadelphia, and I don't believe he was, I asked him about whether he was willing to sell these final paintings, and at the time he was not. He was very much like holding on to them for dear life. Because frankly, he puts a lot of work into it. I think, David's work it was bought by other sort of, I wouldn't say well-known collectors, but, was in some things. So I think he was probably hesitant to let the final paintings go. But what he did have, and we'll show in just a second, was he had the preliminary rejected version of this cover for sale. And when I saw that, I was just like, this was one of my favorite covers. Even seeing the rejected version of this, I was blown away by that. And so immediately bought that. When I got to the final cover, I think after buying the rejected cover, I stayed in touch with him. And I think a year or two later, he did agree to sell me the final version of this cover as well. And then, frankly, it's just beautiful. It's on illustration board. Just amazing, just painted piece. He has sort of a an interesting sort of like crosshatch style where he does a lot of the work. He does the underwork as if it was like pencil and ink, and then he will sort of layer on the painting on top of it, which gives a very sort of stylistic, a different style to it than you would see on a traditional sort of painted cover. What we saw with Michael Golden or a Joe Jusko, as you were saying. I think his style is very much different. But the lighting, the highlights, and in her hair, the fact that it's just glowing, the glistening on the gun, and even the symmetry of the steps in this one just contribute in the belt buckle. I mean, not to mention her shape, but I think as we will see in just a second with the preliminary version of it, actually the shape of it I thought was actually a little bit better in the original version of it. This was the slightly edited version of it that was a little bit more staid, if you want to look at it as far as her pose. But just all the elements on this, just a fantastic painting to me, and was sort of my once and done. Although I did have other David Michael Becks over the years, this is the one I've decided to keep over all the years.
And what I mean, looking at this is really blown up with all of the detail. One of the things that I'm noticing is that he's painted every single brick individually on that building in the background, which I think is just an indicator of the amount of time that he must have spent on producing this, and some of the fine detail in like the hairline of the Baroness as well, that just isn't picked up in reproduction. That kind of fine detail. Have you got this one in front of you somewhere?
I do not. I think it's actually upstairs, unfortunately. I apologize, guys, but
what sort of scale would this one be? Is this
it's a little larger. It's a little larger than normal sized art. It's I don't know, I can't give you that, but it's bigger than normal art. It's on an illustration board, so it's very hard because you would paint this on that, and you got to make sure that the paint doesn't curl the paper. So both this and the one that the pencils that we'll show in just a bit were also both done on an illustration board, sort of to their full amounts. And even the detail of the fact that it goes all the way to the edge. I guess he probably taped off the edges to make sure that it didn't bleed, but it's just clean and crisp. I mean, it shows how neat, as an artist, he's very neat and tidy, which, sometimes you'll see stuff on the sides, like, ink blotches and all that, just show that they were in a rush to do this. But David, took his time to paint these things here. So, but great, great artist. I my big regret, I guess, is the Cobra Commander painting. He was holding on to that for many years and then put it up for sale. And I wish I had bought that. And frankly, even the Storm Shadow and the Snake Eyes, I wish I had bought those as well. So I've tried to contact the owner I've been in contact with the owner of the Snake Eyes for many years, and he's just decided he wants to keep it. Just as much as I love this painting, he loves that painting. And they're all, that era of sort of rebooting G.I. Joe and some of the stuff that they did with these, especially these back covers, just amazing. I think he's very much an underappreciated artist. I mean, the value of his art has not really gone up significantly, because I think really only the Joe collectors have gotten to see and appreciate a lot of this. I think he does a lot of other varied projects that don't get him as much notoriety. But Beck was, one of the greater Joe artists, in my opinion, especially when you think about the fact that this was a relatively dead property, in the early 2000s. They really had to sort of bring it back from out of the dead, and they relaunched it in such a great way. Shall we have a look at the pencils? Yes, so we can see what Hasbro did not like about the original drawing. There we go. So pretty much the same composition, except, as you notice, the hips are in a very different position than they were on the final drawing of this. And from my understanding, and I guess first, even before we even get into that, I think just to appreciate this is how Beck would start. Oop, am I still there? Mark, can you hear? Or Tim, can you hear us?
I can hear. I can hear you.
Okay. I think our screens are dead, but I'll talk over it. Okay, we're back. Okay. This is the first layer of what Beck would do relative to his painting. So he would always start with a very detailed pencil drawing of these, and then, like I said, as he would work up from that and build up the painting from this stage of things. But my understanding is this was given to Hasbro for approval. They felt like the sway of her hips was too sexually, I guess, too much of a sexual innuendo, that they had Beck straighten out the hips in the final version of that. But I think the cover that would have been, and I think actually somebody for a commission actually commissioned Beck to finalize and do a version of this painting, a smaller version of this painting, sort of in its form, and it looks great. I mean, I actually like the original better in some ways, but also understand Hasbro's, especially given that they were relaunching the brand and the fact that they were still trying to keep it toy centric, that it might be a little too much for Hasbro, especially in those early days.
And yeah, and like hearing some of the things that Josh Blaylock has sort of described about those early days at Devil's Due, that the contacts at Hasbro didn't always necessarily understand the brand or the characters that well, and was still in that mentality of this is a kid's toy rather than a nostalgic book for the adults the young adults who had grown up reading G.I. Joe in the 80s and 90s. And so I think, we're pushing back on some of the more mature elements that he wanted to have in the book at that time.
Yeah.
It's interesting that the Baroness is a sexy character, and I'm all for women in comics being posed in a more neutral way, or the way that a man might be posed. And you see a lot of poses in covers and in interiors where an artist draws a female character in a way that they would never draw a male character. And sometimes it's overt and sometimes it's funny. But the Baroness has always been a sexy character, and you can absolutely draw the Baroness in a not sort of at all sexy pose, but she arrives fully formed with a little bit of baggage, and that she is a sexy character. And I can imagine that Cobra Commander sitting in a throne, Storm Shadow holding a sword, is just not going to come under that kind of scrutiny. I mean, this is definitely a pose. Like, a man is not going to, like, there would never be a Destro drawing where he's taking this pose, right? Like, no artist would draw that. And if they did, readers would not like it, and they may know why they don't like it, or they may not know why they don't like it. So I appreciate sort of Hasbro's pushback here. I agree with both of you that the original is a more interesting drawing. It's really wonderful to make the comparison. And previously, Mark had on another episode pulled up that commission, right?
Yeah, the painted version of this one. Yeah.
Yeah. But Chuck, Mark, and I, and our other co-host have talked a little bit about the sort of phenomenon of the sexy Scarlet cover, or the sexy Baroness cover, which shows up in the last 10 years, sometimes for variants.
Yeah. Well, especially like Mike Mayhew's version of this nowadays would be par for the course for any of those covers. And it's interesting to put this in reference of the early 2000s, that this was not acceptable, that this was going too far. While in today's world, you could do a cover like this all day long if you really wanted to, because not only, I think it's because the competition's doing it too. You see this on Marvel, you see this on everything else. I think it's a little bit within context of what are other folks doing to sort of push the boundaries on their IP. And would they do this with the Black Widow? Yeah, the answer is probably yes in today's world. Or, they've done it with, a number of other female characters. But I think in the early 2000s, Lady Death and maybe some of those others, but you weren't seeing it on the mainstream characters per se. And I think you also have to remember that Beck was also drawing he was drawing like Lady Death and other things at that time. So for him, it was probably okay to, it was just the translation of other things that he had done for other publishers. And, it shows a little bit of the fact that when you have to go through the approval process, you might lose some of that creativity that you would want or you would expect out of an independent publisher.
Do you want to go back to the
let me
slide we skipped?
I got a little bit overexcited and I skipped a slide. So let's skip back.
Really like that image, didn't you? Yeah, I guess. So the story behind this one. So a little later, and I think we were talking about Trimpe before, and this sort of talking about my relationship with Herb is after Herb passed away. Patricia, his wife, moved out here to California nearby to me. And I guess I had the pleasure, but also the sadness of helping her to sell the remaining art that was in Herb's collection, as well as some of his comics. And so we, there was a number of pieces that we ended up selling, publicly to a lot of folks, and I'm glad that they ended up with, collectors that really enjoy them. Frankly, there wasn't a lot that I ended up wanting to keep for myself, but this was, I'd always wanted this particular cover from Herb. And I think while he was alive, I had asked him about it, and I don't even know if he just didn't get around to pulling it out for me or didn't know he had it or what it was. But this was one that I was quite surprised to find in his collection of artwork when he had passed away. So I asked Patricia if I could purchase this one, and was lucky enough to be able to. But a couple of interesting things. I mean, here again, you see the sketch cover that was published by Hama, who did the layouts for this. And again, a very true to, it looks like a Herb Trimpe drawing that we would expect, but it is obviously based off of a Hama sketch there that was submitted and given to Herb to essentially, work from. So, great to continue, however many years later, you see that the formula of how Hama was sort of translating the covers was still coming to fruition here, even in the rebooted IDW, issue 169 versus issue 10. But what was more interesting to me about this was also something else that I had found in Herb. I guess it was sort of something I noticed when I saw the cover. Is, if you can zoom in on this, is that it's signed Beto at the very bottom on the buck, like the pouch
down here. Oh, here. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's signed Beto. And so what, I was wondering, I was like, what is that? Because I believe it's Gilbert Hernandez of Love and Rockets. That was the name that he had used as an artist, was Beto. And so my original thought was, did Herb actually ink this, or did he have it inked by one of the Hernandez, was somebody, the Hernandez brothers? And I asked Patricia, because the other thing that I found was this. Here's a copy of G.I. Joe, #1, signed Beto. Okay. And I was like, why would, even if one of the Hernandezes had worked as an inker, why would he sign a copy of G.I. Joe #1? That makes no sense to me. But this was in Herb's personal collection of comics when he died. And so I guess I'll turn it to you guys. Do you know the story behind this?
No.
I do not. No.
It was an odd story. So Patricia told me that they were on a vacation, I believe in South. I can't remember if it was in Latin America or if it was in Mexico. I apologize for not knowing the details. And this is sort of a little bit of a telephone game. But I believe he was talking to, they were on vacation at like maybe a resort, and they were talking to one of the waitresses there. And at the time, they, I think Herb was joking around, and I think they wanted to come up with a name that was appropriate for him in the country. And they're like, "Oh, you look like a Beto." And so from then on, he had adopted this name Beto as his name. And funny part is he started using it as his professional name without maybe people even realizing that. And the fact that he had signed a copy of G.I. Joe 1 with the name Beto at some very specific point in his career, I'd never seen any of these other ones. This may be the only signed G.I. Joe that is signed Beto. Maybe it was a fan that was like, gave it to him and was like, "Can you sign this?" And he signed it Beto. And they're like, "What is this? Who's Beto?" And maybe they gave it to him because they're like, "I don't want a comic saying Beto." I don't know exactly how this got signed Beto, but it had always been a mystery. But it was a name that if you look at some of those other covers from that time period, you'll notice they are all signed Beto. And that was Herb's pen name that he had adopted for a very brief period, sort of towards the late part of his career.
Huh. That's fascinating.
And Mark, I apologize to Patricia if I got part of that story wrong, and or if I wasn't supposed to tell part of that story. But I thought it was interesting for fans out there that do notice that some of these things are signed Beto.
Part of why this cover feels unusual is that we've never seen Trimpe Only once. We've only seen Trimpe draw Snake Eyes version 2.
Oh, right.
I should say 3
119,
times.
I believe, right?
No, that's version. That's version 4.
Version 4.
We've seen, so Trimpe draws in the first year of GI Joe, and that's version 1, of course. Then he comes back. That issue you just mentioned that he wrote Andrew. That's Snake Eyes version 4, and he drew the pinup. He penciled the pinup in Order of Battle 2, the cover of Order of Battle 2. And he must have penciled Special Missions 14 and 15, right?
And he must have done then the reprint edition, the trade paperback of Order of Battle may have had him on that. I don't remember. I used to own that, but
do you mean the new cover? That's Ron.
They did a new cover, a wraparound cover for Order of Battle.
If you're thinking of Roadblock kicking in the door, that's Ron Wagner.
No, it's like a big one with it's got like all the characters.
Oh, sorry. Sorry, I'm thinking of Special Missions. Right, you are. The Order of Battle. But in terms of our like collective fan memory of Trimpe as this associated with GI Joe artist, it's Rod Wiggum and Ron Wagner who were drawing Snake Eyes version 2, and Snake Eyes version 2 is a lot of people's favorite. And so to get Trimpe later in his career, when GI Joe has come back. And it's just Snake Eyes. It's not Snake Eyes and a bunch of other guys. He's not half blocked by a tree. I remember when this first came out, sort of in the back of it was this little tickle in the back of my mind. It's like, well, this is exciting and special, but it's more than just, a cool drawing of Snake Eyes version 2. There's something else going on here. Oh, right. Trimpe's sort of never done this kind of drawing. And it also, it very subtly recalls Zek's cover to 53.
Which is the 25th anniversary covers.
Yes, which is a different angle and a different cropping. But again, in terms of like, how many times has a Spider-Man cover just been like Spider-Man's head or his head and shoulders? Many, many times. How many times has a G.I. Joe cover been that for Snake Eyes? Twice.
And maybe this one as well.
Oh yeah. Thank you. When they go to San Diego Comic-Con, they go to Comic-Con International.
There's something about this cover that you might not be aware of, Chuck. So I'll play something, and I wonder if it's a surprise to you to see. So for the Snake Eyes movie, they've made a number of promotional videos of spotlighting a particular character.
Okay.
And the way that these videos typically run is it'll open with a striking image of that character, a few other comic book images, and then into the movie. So I'll just play a little clip, which might be fun for you to see. Was quite quick.
I had not seen that.
I will
go right now, get my tickets.
I'll play that very beginning bit again for you to see if you. There you go. So it's the very beginning of that video starts in with.
I had not seen that particular
with
one.
Your cover image.
I do. Yeah, it's making me more excited to see the movie. But no, glad to see that this cover lived on, because it was it a variant cover? It wasn't even like, was it the main? I guess it was the main audio
cover. Can you guys hear each other? Thumbs up if you can hear.
I can hear both of you.
My side.
I can hear. Can you not hear me?
Let me just click on this a second and see if that resolves it for me.
Can you hear me?
Can I hear you? No.
Hi, Mark. Hi, Mark.
People at home can hear us.
You guys keep on going then.
You can just
I'll see if I can resolve.
Tim, can you hear me?
Yes. I'm going to put in the chat. Mark, go to next slide.
I'll flip on to the next image, perhaps.
There he goes. He's reading my mind.
There we go.
All right, so I'll pretend to be Mark. Chuck, this is page photocopy of pencils from a Mike Zeck issue of Devil's Due G.I. Joe, silent issue 21. It's too Irish. I know you must have a big story about issue 21, drawn by Mike Zeck, penciled by Mike Zeck. What can you tell us?
Yeah, so when Mike got the call from Devil's Due to do the covers, he started with issue 6, and I wish I had bought that Cobra Commander cover that he first had. I think we put those all on eBay, or I suggested Mike put those all on eBay. And I'd own some of those, but Mike got reintroduced to the G.I. Joe universe as his final, and this was actually G.I. Joe 21. It's hard to believe however many. When was this? 2003, I believe. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow, almost 20 years, 18 years at this point. That's really crazy to me. But this was his last published, continuity book that he had drawn, and still is to this day. He has not gone back to drawing anything. So this is sort of Mike Zeck's leaving comics issue. And for this, they decided to bring Mike and John Beatty, who was the original inker on a lot of those G.I. Joe covers, together. And for this project, Beatty, and we'll see some of the ink pages in a bit, but Beatty really took a different style that he had been using lately, in that he wanted to go back to sort of the feathering and things that he had done in the 1980s to make this issue feel more like a classic G.I. Joe issue that they did. So, Mike and John had started working on this. They had told me that they got the assignment of doing the second version of the silent, or third version, if you want to look at it, of the silent issue as an homage to the original G.I. Joe 21. And they were, similar to years past, I always sort of calling Mike up every week and sort of checking the progress of things and understanding what it was. And in one of those conversations, he was like, "Hey, I've got all this artwork that I'm drawing for this. Do you want to buy it?" And I was just like, even before it was drawn, and I was just like, sounds good. It was like, I haven't seen it sight unseen. I'll buy it, whatever it is. And so that was sort of week 1 of the project, as I had agreed to buy it. And they're like, "Great, we know we're going to need some extra money out of this, so we can put some extra effort into this issue." So then as they were getting into it, I think maybe it was week 2, or I think it was maybe week 3, because I think I waited a week. And then I was like, "Hey, Mike, since I'm buying this issue, is there any way that you could sort of work me into the issue? I mean, it'd be nice to have something." And so you'll notice through the issues that there's an arcade that's featured on there. And there's no words. I mean, this is the problem, is they actually have no actual word bubbles. So they can't say, "Hey, Chuck Costas, how you doing?" So they subtly put it in there by calling the arcade Costas Corners Arcade. So if you look through the book, you'll see many references to Costas Corners Arcade, although the Costas part is blocked out in this particular page. And then, I called them up. Then I was like, "Okay, that's great. It's great. I'm glad you got that in." And then the following week, I was like, "Well, it would be nice if maybe I could be a character in the book as well." And they're like, "Yeah, I wish you would have told me that before we started drawing the whole book, because we're on page 18 at this point. It's pretty late in the book to try to get you into the book, but we'll see what we can do." So here was the page that they were sort of stuck on when I made my request of making a cameo appearance in the book. And so if you zoom into that top panel, you'll see sort of in front of Costas Corners Cafe, you'll see a gentleman, I believe, in a I think it was a Captain America shirt that maybe that person's wearing, or there's just a person behind Billy there that's sort of rooting on. Oh, actually, no, the Captain America is off to the left a little bit. So he's got a gang of kids, and so they decided that was where they could sort of hide me, I guess, in the crowd, so to speak. So I guess we can move to the next page. So this was the pencil version of it. The next page is the ink. So you'll notice that the character next to Billy got redone, and they decided to put me in a Punisher t-shirt in there. Mm-hmm. But if you zoom in close, this was Mike and John's attempt to draw me freestyle, using reference, of course, but this was all sort of their pen and ink. And I think Mike and John thought that my hair was a little. I mean, I've plumped out a little bit since then. I'll let the audience know that I've gotten a little rounder since those early days in the picture that I gave them to reference. But I think they felt like maybe the hair was a little bit too scraggly or whatever else. So they decided that they needed to use a little bit of Photoshop after the fact to make it look more like an actual likeness of me. And so if you move on to the next page. This is if you blow up, you'll see that they sort of tightened up really just sort of the likeness of me. to make it look a little bit more realistic. And that's at least how I used to look maybe whenever, geez, almost 20 years ago when they were drawing this thing. But the subtle Punisher T-shirt, since I had bought a lot of Mike's Punisher artwork as well, which was a nice touch that, borderline on copyright infringement. But who was looking at it?
Chuck,
Marvel. Hopefully, my friends at Marvel aren't watching right now.
I shared this anecdote with you when we were emailing a couple of years ago, but I read the first year of the Devil's Due series, and then I dropped the book, but I came back for issue 21 because it was a big deal, and I was very excited. And when I got to this page, I thought, I don't know who that is, but that's someone.
Yes, that was me. Yeah, you could see the detail that I guess. But I hate to say it, when they colorized it, you couldn't really tell all the detail that was in this. It's really only the black and white version of this that you can sort of see all the details in there. But yeah, that was my one cameo. I didn't stick around in the issue, but I can at least now say that I was an official. I don't call it G.I. Joe character, but I was officially in an issue of G.I. Joe. I did not make it into the latest Snake Eyes movie, as far as I know. But I think
your code name is Bystander.
Yes, Bystander and Punisher T-shirt.
So yes. we'll work on a toy package profile image with an explosion behind it. It can be you with your Punisher shirt. Are you a blue jeans guy?
Yeah, we'll do blue jeans. So that sounds
okay. Good. What kind of shoes? Sneakers?
Let's go with some of those Cobra shoes that came out a few years ago. That would be sneakers. Yeah.
And then a portfolio case under your arm, or a novelty brush with ink on it.
Maybe a movie prop. I don't know. Something like that.
Hasbro can save money by just reusing the Mars briefcase.
There we go.
From the Rise of Cobra.
Mars briefcase with me.
Figures, right? And in the story, it's like, well, you're the collector, and that's the prop.
I am the collector. Yes. Well, I like to think of the backstory as I'm the arcade owner of Costas Corners Arcade, and I'm stepping out to see what's going on, and I'm really happy to see Snake Eyes kicking some butt there. So it's a cameo from the Costas Corners Arcade.
I'm shocked that that codename Bystander is so pleased that this small section of Los Angeles or San Francisco is getting torched.
I'm happy. I'm just happy to see my hero. It's I'm just like, wow, Snake Eyes, he's in front of me. I can't believe this is happening. I'm just a small arcade owner that owns Costas Corners. And look at all this. Look, my place is trashed, but hey, at least it was done by Snake Eyes and the cast and crew that all came out to be in my comic book today. So
he's a Punisher. Yeah. He's a Punisher fan. He just wants to see the world.
Well, everybody else got punished in this issue. So. But yeah, so that's the history of my cameo appearance in G.I. Joe number 21.
And you have all of the inked pages in your.
I do. I used to have all the prelim pages. I sold those off to another collector, but kept all the pages, and that actually brings me back to sort of the Ringling exhibit that we're going to be doing at the Ringling College of Art and Design, and it's going to start October 18th through the December 10th. We worked out with Hasbro that we'll have all those pages on display so that people can read the entire silent story front to back on one wall over there, as well as every single G.I. Joe Mike Zeck cover and major piece that I own. So if you want to take a trip down to Sarasota, Florida sometime this winter, it'd be a good place for Joe fans to go and check out that exhibit. Hopefully it'll be something that people will remember, and it's frankly the first time I've gotten to put that much Joe art up. I don't have that much wall space, as you can see in this little segment.
Is there a place that people should be typing into Google to find out the details of this one, or is it a wait and see to get the full scoop once?
I think it's a little bit of an early scoop for you guys. I don't think it's been officially announced even on their website that it's coming, but it is, from what I've been told, it's starting October 18th and going through December 10th. And frankly, right as soon as I get done with this, I need to pull all the artwork off the walls and put it and get it ready for the art person to ship down to Florida so they can start getting it ready for the exhibit later on this year. So, but I had done an exhibit of Mike Zeck's art, including some of the G.I. Joe stuff, in 2014 at the Cartoon Art Museum that was at that point in downtown San Francisco.
I was going to say, Chuck, you probably know Andrew Farago.
I do. Yes.
So my wife and I she has family near San Francisco, and we were in the city, and we were I think we were like looking up comic book stores and like places to get coffee and food. And she said, isn't that a comic museum here? And we found it on her phone, and we got there, and the like marquee or the sort of stencil in the window, it's like the art of Mike Zeck. And I was like, what? Because we hadn't planned the trip into the city with anything in particular. Like, oh, we'll see a friend of mine from college, and we'll go to a comic book store or two. And and we went inside, and the date on the pamphlet or the placard, the show, you know, it had run like 3 months, and the show had ended the day before.
Oh.
And I have this this comes after the sort of, you know, famous meme of like Darth Vader from the Star Wars prequel yelling no, but sort of in my mind, collectively I have that, and I have Riker from that season 1 episode of Star Trek: The Next Generation saying damn it to hell, and I'm just sort of ready to get down on my knees and say no. And we sort of looked in, and the person at the desk said, oh, the show's actually up for another 2 days because we're not taking it down immediately. And I turned to my wife, and she's an illustrator and she appreciates comics, and she's like, yes, let's go in. So there's all this Punisher stuff, and like the Secret Wars 1 cover, and some Kraven's Last Hunt, and there's like a big stencil on the wall, you know, as museums do, and just a bunch of G.I. Joe work. Was the Yearbook 3 cover in that show?
I think I did lend the Yearbook 3 cover to that exhibit. Yes.
And Mark, I seem to have some anxiety when it comes to feeling G.I. Joe when I'm in California, because I think we only had like, 30 minutes because we had to like hop the train back to like family for dinner, or, it was 4:00 and the museum was closing at 5. I think they were doing an art lessons for younger people in sort of the room off the lobby. And I would have gladly just stayed there for 2 hours and just stared at each one and like talked about it to my wife like we're doing now, and pulled out my sketchbook. And so I had enough time, but I was a little rushed. But I was so pleased that we had made it. And it was all serendipity because we hadn't looked into what do we do in the city? Is there some dream exhibit that like shouldn't exist on paper? It's like, Tim, what's your fantasy art exhibit if you're going to stumble into it's Mike Zeck, all of his covers and pages from Marvel. So thank you. Well,
you're welcome. I'm glad it hit home. It was a great exhibit to put on. If you go out on eBay, you can probably find a copy of the old book we made for that called Raw Fury that has some of the G.I. Joe stuff got snuck into there. For this one, like I said, we're officially doing this alongside with Hasbro's blessing, so we can put a whole bunch of G.I. Joe art up there, and the people can appreciate that. But yeah, appreciate you guys taking the time to go through at least samples of my collection. I think that, like I said, a larger part will be there, but you guys got me thinking as well with G.I. Joe hitting its 40th anniversary. Hadn't thought of it. Andrew and I had always talked about doing a G.I. Joe exhibit when there was a major anniversary for G.I. Joe, and I hadn't thought about there's much more than I have than just Mike Zeck stuff in my collection. So maybe there's some stuff I can lend out to make an even bigger exhibit somewhere else that will make Joe fans happy on a very large anniversary. I think 40 years of the 1982 Joes is going to be big for the franchise.
Will you attend the opening of the exhibit?
I will. Yes, we will allegedly be there on October 18th. I'm still seeing if Mike's going to be in the country, Zeck that is, to also come down. But if he is, likely he'll come visit as well.
Is there any talk of him giving a lecture, or just sort of being there for more than just the opening sort of cocktail reception?
Yeah, frankly, we haven't worked it out. I think we have to first figure out if Mike's going to be in the country, because he was planning on before COVID going out of the country for a prolonged period of time, and still hasn't been able to get out of the country. So I think it'll just depend on when the borders open up and when he's able to go on. He's now technically retired, so he wants to enjoy his retirement a little bit. So if he's there, otherwise I may see if there's other either I'll probably give some kind of speech, or we'll have some other folks that may have worked with him over the years there to give something. But I'm hoping Mike will be there, and we'll try. We're also trying to get some video out of him too, to add to the exhibit, to make it a little bit more virtual than that the 2014 exhibit was. I think now there's things that hopefully we can do a little bit more high tech than what we had back in those days. So anyway, but it's been lovely going through the stacks of artwork, and I'm even learning new things about pieces that I own, because I haven't frankly taken them out to appreciate them, and I'm glad we got a chance to do that today, guys.
Yeah, no, thank you for being so generous in terms of sharing both your collection, but also your time. Yeah, it's been a delight looking at this art in some detail, and yeah, it's sort of very generous of you to share both your art and your time. So
my pleasure.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
Yeah. For our viewers, it's not just the hours that Chuck's been live with us talking. It's also him culling and scanning and emailing and agreeing. On behalf of Mark and I, and also our many viewers, Chuck, this has been wonderful. Thank you for sharing. Your enthusiasm is clear, and as fans, I think we're lucky. I mean, you're lucky that you bought some of the stuff when you did. Like, how forward thinking of you. But as fans, in a way, we're lucky that a lot of this stuff is safe because you got it, and it's on a wall, it's in a portfolio, and it didn't get lost, or it didn't get sort of sold and sort of disappear.
Yeah, and I think if there are things I can contribute to, I know I help Marvel out all the time, and if there's things I can do with Hasbro, I'm more than happy to do that as well. And hopefully I'll renew some of my contacts over at Hasbro this year, as I'm working with them down on the Ringling exhibit, to see what we can do potentially next year. And just like you guys, I'm looking forward to seeing what happens with that Snake Eyes movie in just a few short weeks. So I'm excited about that. So hopefully it'll we'll all go back 2 or 3 times, but it'll be our reintroduction to the movie theaters, I think, for many of us.
Okay. Was there anything else you wanted to promote or plug while we've got you, Chuck, before we wrap up?
No, like I said, I think for those that see for those that are interested in Marvel art as well, like I said, I'm helping with the Marvel Universe of Superheroes exhibit that's traveling. It's going from this right now. It's in Chicago. It's going to be going, I think, later in November out to Columbus, Ohio, for those that might be in the Midwest. Come visit that, but it gives you some more insight into sort of original art like this, as well as movie props, although Marvel oriented versus the G.I. Joe stuff. What else we've got for those that are in Los Angeles that happen to be watching this? Another thing that I sort of work on in my spare time is we started a convention that used to be the weekend before San Diego Comic-Con. It's under Torpedo Comics, TorpedoCon as they call it. That will be coming up I think the 25th, I believe, that weekend, 3 days. So helping John Del Mayan and the Torpedo guys with that, as far as attracting folks for that. But that's got a great guest list, including Frank Miller, Jim Lee, Frank Cho, Bill Sienkiewicz, some guys you may have heard of that will be showing up at the show. So if you're in Los Angeles, you've been looking for a comic show to go to, please check that out.
And Chuck, you have a comic art fans page.
I do. Yeah, you can look under Charles Costas. That's my alternate name, not guy in background that's outside of Costas Corners Arcade all the time. Bystander, sorry. I forget my name sometimes. I'm getting older. Sometimes I go by Beto. I don't know why. But no, I do have comic art fans. You're welcome to check that out. And I do occasionally, help artists out with art sales of things. I think, if you're a fan of Mike Vosberg, we talked about some of his, you can go to his website, which is Vosart, I believe. And VOZ, he goes by these days. He changed his name as well from Voss, VOS, to VOZ. But yeah, I mean, I think what I have always appreciated is, frankly, the variety of different artists. We talked about many of them today. There are other ones that are in my collection, such as Jeff Isherwood or John Byrne, or there's other artists that worked on these early Joes and even today's Joes. There's a whole host of different folks that have sort of carried on the tradition, and I think it lives. We owe it to them to sort of thank them for their hard work on this, of sort of creating the universe that we love here. And hopefully my collection and us talking about them today can help them live on in everybody's hearts. And I, my fondest to the Trempe family. I think Herb was an amazing artist, amazing friend, and an amazing person, and that many people interacted with. And I know there's many other folks out there as well that I need to say thank you to. And but Larry as well, and everybody's been great to me over the years as far as approaching them as a fan and getting to know them as an artist. And I hope many of you out there, don't be intimidated. I think all these creators are very, when you talk to them, whether it's Ron Rudat or Herb or Don Perlin or whoever it is, I think they appreciate that you appreciate their work. So say thank you and keep them all in our hearts.
Excellent. And Tim, if people want to find out more about you and what you do in your little world of G.I. Joe, where would they go?
My website is arealamericanbook.com.
Excellent. And if you want to find out more about Talking Joe and the show in general, there is a place to go where we've got the links to everything. That is talkingjoe.co.uk. Big thanks to all of our Patreon contributors as well. I'll give them a shout out. Richard, Sam, Jay, Bill, Christopher, Justin, thank you for keeping the lights on. And I think that is almost us done. But there is something that we say at the end. It is, when all is said and done, you can catch us down the road.
Because you've been, because we've been Talking Joe. Like we haven't been doing this for months.
You've been Chuck Costas, and we're not out of your art because I think we barely scratched the surface, but we are out of time, and currently we are all out of Joes. Thanks to everyone. Thanks, Chuck. Thanks to everyone sticking with us and enjoying the show. Look forward to next time.